The 7 kingdoms wouldn't burn. They would freeze. The council room fell silent. Bran the Broken had just been crowned king of Westeros. Lords and ladies bowed, voices solemn. But Jon Snow didn't move. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He only looked at Tyrion, then at Bran, and then turned and walked out without a word. The silence behind him wasn't out of respect. It was fear. Jon had accepted exile. He had killed Daenerys. He had given up his claim. But now, as he stood beneath the godswood of Winterfell, the roots bleeding sap like blood into the snow, something inside him changed. This wasn't peace. This was punishment. And for what? Loving a queen? Saving the realm? His breath steamed in the cold northern air. Ghosts padded beside him. The North had been loyal. They had bled for him. And now they were being asked to kneel again. Jon didn't tell Sansa. He didn't send ravens. He didn't consult councils. He simply arrived at Winterfell. The guards let him in without question. The people whispered his name like a prayer. "He's back," they said. "The true wolf." And for the first time in weeks, Jon didn't deny it. He walked into the great hall, stood beneath the direwolf banners, and claimed what he never asked for but always belonged to him. "I am Jon Snow," he said, his voice echoing off stone walls. "I may be no king of the 7 kingdoms, but I will not kneel to a boy who was pushed from a tower and calls it fate." It wasn't a declaration of war. Not yet, but the shockwaves reached King's Landing by nightfall. Tyrion was the first to panic. He knew Jon's silence had never been submission. He warned Bran. "You chose mercy," Tyrion said, "but mercy doesn't bind wolves." Bran didn't blink. "He's fulfilling his path," the Boy King said. "Let it unfold." But the lords of the North didn't wait for Bran's permission. They rallied behind Jon faster than anyone expected. House Manderly, House Glover, even the skeptical Karstarks bent a knee. "The North remembers," they said, "and we remember who fought the Night King." Tormund came back from beyond the wall. He brought thousands, wildlings, free folk. They came not as invaders, but as allies. "He bled for us," Tormund said. "Now we bleed for him." And while King's Landing brewed political tea, Winterfell raised black banners. Jon did not march south. He did not send threats. He fortified. He trained. And that was worse, because the South knew how to fight men who wanted to conquer. But how do you fight a man who simply wants to guard what's his? The Raven arrived at Dragonstone first. Daenerys' old fortress had become a strategic watchpost under Bran's reign, a Targaryen ruin now loyal to a Stark king. The irony was not lost on the small council as they read Jon's simple message. Winterfell stands alone. No demands, no threats, no oaths, just a wall of cold resolve between the North and the rest of the realm. The council erupted. Yohn Royce calling it treason, Gendry Baratheon cautioning patience, Samwell Tarly quietly biting his tongue. But Tyrion? Tyrion sat still, fingers steepled, the weight of past mistakes dragging his shoulders down. "This isn't about a throne," Tyrion said at last. "This is about dignity, and a man who's had it stripped from him one too many times." Bran didn't speak. His eyes drifted upward, unseeing and far away. Raven feathers filled his mind. Snow, steel, blood on stone. Back in Winterfell, Jon stood at the training yard, watching children spar with wooden swords. He corrected a boy's stance. He pulled a girl's elbow back into place. He didn't speak of war, but he prepared for it with every breath. He knew what would come. The realm didn't understand silence. It took any lack of obedience as rebellion, and rebellion demanded a response. Sansa arrived within days, not with soldiers, but with fire. She stormed through the gates, fury in her voice. "Are you mad? Do you want to undo everything?" Jon met her in the great hall, his voice low. "I never wanted anything. But they chose Bran." "No, you chose Bran." The air between them grew colder than the wind outside. Sansa wasn't wrong, but neither was he. Arya's return tilted the balance. She said little. She always did. But when asked where her loyalty lay, she simply looked at Jon and said, "Family." That was enough for the North. South of the neck, the reactions varied. The Riverlands were torn. House Tully had ties to both Bran and the Starks. Edmure tried to stay neutral. That made him irrelevant. The Vale wavered. Little Lord Robin had grown into a man, but not a wise one. He sought Sansa's counsel, but she gave none. Storm's End remained quiet. Gendry didn't forget who knighted him, but he also didn't forget the crown that legitimized him. King's Landing, meanwhile, prepared. Bran sent Ser Davos with an olive branch. "Speak to him," Bran said. "Remind him that we are family." Jon met Davos at the edge of the Wolf's Wood. "I was there, Jon," Davos said, voice gentle. "I saw what happened at the Dragon Pit. This peace, it's fragile. Don't shatter it." Jon looked past him toward the white trees. "I'm not shattering peace," he said. "I'm just not bending anymore." That night, Bran dreamed of a great direwolf standing atop the wall, howling into a storm. And south of Winterfell, armies began to stir. Crows circled Harrenhal. A storm rolled across the Riverlands, and with it, messengers bearing the king's seal. Bran's court moved quickly, mobilizing bannermen, requesting levies, reaffirming oaths sworn in the aftermath of the war. But something had changed. The war against the dead had unified Westeros through fear. This war, this tension, split again through memory. Every lord remembered who Jon Snow was. Some owed him their lives. Others feared what he represented. A ruler with no hunger for power, but every reason to claim it. At Winterfell, Jon remained still. He didn't march. He didn't declare kingship. But his quiet resistance became louder than any horn blast. More houses followed. House Reed pledged in secret. Howland sending his son with sword forged from Valyrian steel. "You'll need it soon," was all the note said. The Umbers, scattered after the long night, returned in force. And even some of the Night's Watch, what was left of it, crossed the wall to stand with him. "He was our Lord Commander," they said. "He died for us. We stand for him." It wasn't just loyalty. It was justice. Back in King's Landing, Queen Yara Greyjoy paced the Red Keep walls. Her eyes narrowed toward the north. "Let him have his snow and stone," she said. "If he doesn't raise a banner, we don't raise a blade." But Lord Grafton of Gulltown disagreed. "If we wait, he'll grow stronger." So the whispers began. Plans to divide the Vale, isolate the Neck, cut off the north before it became untouchable. Bran listened but said little, until Tyrion pressed him. "If you want peace, you must act. If you wait, Jon will become a king whether he wants to or not." Bran finally looked up, then let the realm decide what kind of king it truly wants. And just like that, the letters began. Ravens flew from the capital, not with threats, but with fear, thinly veiled in politics, offers of titles, promises of security, whispers of marriages, anything to dilute Jon's quiet defiance. He ignored them all. In the crypts of Winterfell, Jon stood before Lyanna Stark's tomb. His hand rested on the cold stone. "They gave me your name," he whispered, "and I wore like a chain." Ghosts lay at his feet, silent. Snowflakes drifted down from the cracked ceiling above. He didn't want a throne, but he couldn't let another one decide the North's fate again. Outside the crypt, Sansa waited. "They're coming," she said. He nodded. "I know." They came not as invaders, but as reminders. Bran's envoys arrived first, not with soldiers, but with words wrapped in velvet and poison. Ser Podrick Payne rode at their head, carrying a letter bearing the royal seal. He handed it to Sansa in silence. She read it by firelight, her lips tightening with each line. When Jon asked what it said, she burned it before answering. "They want you to come to King's Landing, to clarify your intentions." Jon didn't reply. He didn't need to. The next day, Lord Grafton's ships were spotted near White Harbor. Not docking, lurking, watching, measuring. Davos, who had stayed, leaned over the battlements beside Jon. "They're not just here to spy. They're here to remind you that the sea doesn't belong to wolves." Jon didn't turn. Let them watch. The North prepared anyway. Blacksmiths worked day and night. Training drills doubled. Ravens flew nonstop between northern houses. But Jon didn't bark commands. He didn't call banners. He let the wind carry the truth. If the South moved against Winterfell, Winterfell would not kneel. It was Arya who asked the question everyone feared. Will it be war? Jon stared out at the falling snow, his face unreadable. No, he said at last. But it might be something worse. Because Westeros wasn't ready for another war. The last one had drained the realm, its gold, its soldiers, its spirit. But a fractured peace built on silence and suspicion, that was a knife to the throat of every house, still healing. Tyrion saw it too. At court, he warned Bran again. You chose unity over justice. Now you're losing both. Bran said nothing. But ravens flew from the Red Keep that night, far more than usual. And soon after, word came. The Iron Throne was rebuilding its armies. Publicly, it was called a defensive restructuring. Privately, it was a silent march toward the inevitable. Back in the north, Sansa held her council. Lords and ladies gathered in the hall. Jon refused to sit in as king. They wanted to name him ruler. Again, he refused. Again, I'm not here to rule, Jon said. But you already are, Sansa said softly. They just haven't admitted it yet. And somewhere in the shadows of Winterfell, a hooded figure arrived under cover of night. Brienne of Tarth. She had left King's Landing without permission, her sword still bearing the lion and stag sigil. She knelt before Jon without being asked. For the realm, she said, and for honor. Jon helped her up, and for the first time in weeks, his voice broke. I didn't want this. Brienne only looked at him, eyes steady. Neither did I. The realm, meanwhile, began to split quietly. The Riverlands no longer answered letters from King's Landing. The lords declaring in the Vale began meeting in secret. And in Dorne, murmurs of northern independence stirred old Martell pride. Jon had not declared anything, but the realm heard it anyway. The wolf was no longer kneeling, and that terrified them all. The first blood was spilled not on a battlefield, but in a tavern. A pair of northern traders, wearing wolf brooches, were ambushed in Fairmarket. Their bodies were strung up outside the gates with a sign that read, Traitors to the Crown. No trial, no warning, just a message. And messages, once sent in blood, are not easily recalled. Winterfell received the news by Raven. Jon read it in silence, then passed a letter to Arya. Her face did not change. But that night she was gone. No one asked where, because they already knew. What followed was not war. It was something colder. The North shut its borders. No southern patrols passed the neck. No goods crossed the Twins. No ravens were answered. It was a rebellion. It was retreat, a silent secession. And silence, in a land ruled by whispers and steel, became its own declaration. In King's Landing, Bran faced his first true test as king. His court split. Some urged diplomacy. Jon is family, Sam said. Talk to him. Others wanted action. Yoenroy spoke loudest. If we let him sit, he becomes a symbol. The realm won't follow a boy on wheels if a warrior in the snow starts walking toward the throne. Tyrion, torn between loyalty and reason, said nothing. For once, he had no answer. So Bran made a decision. He called the banners. Not all came. Storm's End sent a token force. The Reach sent gold but no men. Only the Westerlands answered in strength. Ser Adam Lannister marching north with 2,000 men and 3 times the arrogance. His orders: secure the neck. Hold Moat Cailin. Do not engage Jon Snow. He did all but the last. Adam rode hard to the marshes, laughing at swamp ghosts and northern superstition. His scouts vanished one by one. His supply line shrank. And when he reached Moat Cailin, he found it abandoned, or so he thought. The attack came at night. No horns, no banners, just cold steel and silent wolves. When dawn broke, the moat ran red. Adam's head was returned south in a pinewood box with no inscription, just a dire wolf tooth inside. The South called it murder. The North called it a warning. Jon said nothing. He hadn't ordered it, but he hadn't stopped it either. And somewhere deep beyond the wall, the free folk began to stir, not as an army, but as a myth. The Wolf King stands, they whispered, and winter follows him. Meanwhile, Arya returned to Winterfell alone. Her blade was clean. Her eyes were not. She didn't speak of fair market. She didn't have to. Sansa watched her from across the hall. We're past the point of no return, aren't we? Arya shrugged. We never left it. And in the shadows of the old god's woods, Jon Snow stood with Ghost at his side, watching the red leaves fall. The South would call it treason. The North, they would call it home. The storm finally broke, not of thunder, but of steel. The crown, humiliated by the fall of Moat Cailin and the silence from Winterfell, abandoned subtlety. A royal decree was issued. All lords of Westeros must reaffirm allegiance to King Bran. Any who recognize Jon Snow as sovereign shall be declared enemies of the realm. It wasn't diplomacy. It was a line in the snow. And Lord began to choose. House Manderly refused. We bent the knee to the Stark in the north, Lord Wyman's grandson declared. We'll not break it for the boy in the south. House Blackwood sent back a single raven. Winter comes. House Hightower remained silent, but withdrew their gold from the capital. In desperation, King's Landing sent a final envoy, Tyrion. He arrived alone. No guards, no pomp, just a man weighed down by guilt and time. Jon met him in the great hall of Winterfell, the fire low, the air sharp. Tyrion didn't sit. I begged them not to send me, he began. But I came anyway. Jon didn't move. They say you mean to take the throne. I don't, Jon said. They say you mean to secede. I don't. They say you mean to fight. Jon's voice was quiet. I mean to live and protect what's mine. If that means war, then they're the ones choosing it. Tyrion looked around the hall, at the old Stark banners, at the northern lords waiting beyond the shadows. You know how this ends, Jon. Jon nodded. Yes, the same way it always does. With fire, or with snow. Tyrion's breath caught. For a moment, he saw Daenerys again in Jon's eyes, not her fury, just her unshakable belief that she was right, and that made it worse. He left without finishing his wine. The next moon turned red. Royal forces marched, 3,000 strong under banners of the Stag and Raven, led by Ser Harwin of the Crown Guard and Lord Royce himself. They didn't march on Winterfell. They marched on White Harbor. It was a tactical move. Choke the sea. Cut the North's trade. Force Jon to respond. He did, but not with speeches, not with threats. With ships, dozens of them, carved from hard pine, crewed by free folk and northern sailors alike. Ghost ships with no sigils, no colors, just dark sails and cold vengeance. They struck at night. The harbor burned before the royal camp even saw a torch. Supply lines severed. Command tents collapsed. Half the Crown's army woke, choking on smoke. The other half drowned in retreat. Jon never left Winterfell, but the South felt his hand. And this time, the Crown didn't call it rebellion. They called it war. And Westeros was once again divided not by land or blood, but by loyalty to the boy who watched from a throne of ash and roots, or the wolf who stood in the snow and refused to kneel. The war was never declared in words. It was declared in absences, in oaths not spoken, banners not raised, ravens not returned. And it crept slowly, like frost over a window pane. King's Landing responded the only way it knew how, with gold, with steel, and with fear. Levies were drawn from the Reach. The Red Wine Fleet was promised to blockade the Narrow Sea. Letters went out to the Iron Bank, requesting further loans. War was coming and the Crown needed coin. But money couldn't buy loyalty. Not anymore. At Highgarden, Lord Tyrell's cousin refused a levy. The North bled for us when the dead marched. We will not bleed against them now. Quiet murmurs of rebellion stirred through the South. Not for Jon, but against the boy king whose reign had become a riddle wrapped in roots and riddles. Bran said nothing. He sat in the Red Keep Solar, surrounded by scrolls and silence, his face unreadable. Some said he was seeing the past. Others whispered he was waiting for something worse. But the realm did not wait. White Harbor was scarred but unbroken. Its reconstruction became a symbol, a North that wouldn't just resist but endure. And from this resilience, Alliances grew. Dorne sent a delegation. Quiet, careful, not a full army, just a message. We respect those who mind their own lands. The Vale remained fractured. Robb and Arryn, pushed by rivals, offered half-hearted support to Crown, but kept his best knights at home. Even the Riverlands began to stir. Lord Tully, still bitter from being mocked at Bran's council, met with Sansa behind closed doors. No banners were exchanged, but the look on his face when he left Winterfell said enough. And through it all, Jon stayed still. Not passive, just grounded, focused. He trained men, reinforced keeps, fortified the neck. And when asked, "When will you strike?" he always answered the same: "When they give me no choice." But war is not always a sword in the gut. Sometimes it's a whisper in the ear. One night, a chambermaid in Winterfell found a blade beneath her cot, poison-tipped, Dornish make. She vanished before morning. A week later, the water in the crypts ran black. A rat lay floating, split open. Maester said it was disease. Arya said it was a warning. And then came the worst blow of all. A raven from Castle Black. The wall had fallen. Not to wildlings. Not to war. To neglect. No food. No coin. No purpose. The last dozen men of the watch abandoned their posts and fled south, stripped of hope and honor. The message was short. There is no night's watch. There is only snow. Jon stood beneath the shattered watchtower 3 days later, ghost at his side, melting ice dripping from stone. And for the first time in years, he spoke a prayer, not to the old gods, not to the new, just to the wind. They built it to keep something out, he whispered. But no one remembers what. The wind didn't answer, but it was colder than it had ever been. Winter had truly come, and it was no longer just a season. The fall of the wall didn't bring an invasion. Not this time. There were no white walkers, no horn blasts echoing the night. Just silence. Endless, creeping silence. And when it came unease deeper than any sword could carve, Jon returned to Winterfell changed. Quieter, his gaze more distant. When Sansa asked what he'd seen beyond the wall, he gave no answer, but the cold clung to him even near the fire. Rumors spread like wildfire through the realm. Some said the wall had fallen by natural decay. Others whispered darker things. That magic was leaking back in the land, wild, untamed, and drawn to the chaos brewing between Bran and Jon. The north hardened. Quiet towns emptied into holdfasts. Children were drilled with daggers. The old gods' trees were carved anew with protective symbols no one remembered the meaning of. A forgotten dread returned, not of war, but of something deeper, something older. In the south, the crown tried to spin the collapse. Tyrion spoke to court. The wall served its purpose. Peace has returned. We no longer need it. But no one believed him. Not really, because birds stopped coming from Eastwatch. Ships from Skagos vanished in the mist, and the snow in the King's Road began falling earlier than it had in decades. Worse still, Bran began to change. He stopped attending court altogether. Some days, he was not seen at all. His eyes grew darker, distant, always lost in a storm of ravens that filled the skies above the Red Keep. Some nights, servants swore they heard whispering in the halls, voices that sounded like him, but came from nowhere. Maester Sam tried to reach him. He was turned away. Brienne, once Bran's sworn protector, left the city. No explanation, just silence. And in the midst of it all, Jon received a single raven, scrawled in Bran's own hand. "Come south. Alone. I will show you what this is really about." Sansa tried to stop him. Arya threatened to follow. But Jon went. No army, no companions. Just him and Ghost, cloaked in snow and silence, riding through the long night toward King's Landing. It was not a trap, but it wasn't peace either. He entered the Red Keep through the side gates, escorted by silent gold cloaks. Tyrion met him in the throne room, older now, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of regrets. "He's waiting," was all he said. Jon found Bran in the highest tower, beneath a shattered window, surrounded by scrolls and ash. Bran didn't look up. He didn't blink. "I see it all," he said. But no one listens. Jon stepped forward. Then tell me. Bran finally turned. His eyes were not human. Not entirely. They swirled with color. Time. Shadows. The world is breaking, he said. Not because of war, but because of what lies beneath it. The weirwoods whisper it. The ravens scream it. And you, Jon, you are the storm they're trying to stop. Jon's hand drifted to Longclaw. I never asked for any of this. No, Bran said, but you're still the one who must choose. Outside, thunder cracked, but no rain fell. Only ash. Jon didn't answer, not with words. He stared at Bran, trying to find the boy he once knew, the boy who fell from a tower, the brother he buried in his heart long ago. But all he saw now was a storm. The eye, the cold center of something ancient and unraveling. What am I choosing between? Jon finally asked. Bran blinked slowly, as if it pained him. Between the world that was, he said, and the one that's coming. Jon's jaw clenched. You sound like her. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Daenerys still burned behind every decision he made. I sound like time, Bran replied, his voice brittle. The longer I sit on this throne, the more I feel it pulling through me. Westeros isn't just bleeding from war. It's dying from its memory. And I am memory made flesh. He looked up. The flickering candlelight caught in his eyes that looked older than the wall itself. Kill me, Bran said softly. Jon stepped back. What? End this, before the roots go too deep, before the past turns into prophecy. Jon stared at him in disbelief. You put yourself on a throne. No, Bran said. They did, because they needed to believe a broken boy could fix a broken kingdom. But I was never meant to rule, only witness. And I've seen too much. Jon shook his head. There has to be another way. Bran's voice dropped to a whisper. There isn't. If you leave me here, Jon, the realm will rot from the inside out. They'll keep clinging to the old stories. And soon, the darkness beneath the world will no longer wait. A long silence passed. Then Jon asked the one question he'd tried to bury for years. What if I'm not the one to do it? Bran looked up at him. You already did it once. You can do it again. And then Jon understood. This wasn't about the throne. It never was. This was about legacy, about breaking the wheel in a way fire never could. Not with dragons, not with blades, but with sacrifice. He walked out of chamber, his hand trembling against Longclaw's hilt. He didn't look back. Word spread like wildfire, but there was no body, only a locked tower, only a throne left empty, only the broken crown resting on cold stone. King's Landing did not burn. It shivered. And Westeros, for the first time in memory, had no king, no ruler, no regent, just snow and silence. At Winterfell, Sansa received no letter, no raven, only Arya's arrival, alone, eyes unreadable. He won't be coming back, she said, and the Stark words rang louder than ever. Winter is here. But no one knew if it would end.